Welcome back. We are on season 2, episode 3. Today, we are back with a topic that is often controversial, often sought for. Today, we are talking about what are some useful metrics to measure for engineering teams. My name is Keyur. I'm here with some awesome co hosts. We can do a quick roundtable.
Hi, I'm Vic.
Hi, I'm Mitra.
Hello, I'm Louis.
Hello, I'm Thiago. So today we're going to be talking about metrics, but before we actually go deep into the kind of metrics we're talking about, I think it's important to understand that are like different kinds of metrics, different buckets of metrics. So there is the bucket one, that's the one that we're going to be focusing today. That's the engineering productivity metrics. That's focused on the execution. Like this is related to the famous velocity, pull requests, like cycle time. Then there is the observability space that's more focused on operations, scaling system, that's like the P99, the availability, all those metrics that are more related to the health of the ecosystem that's running, right? The platform side of things. And then there is the third bucket that's probably the most important. That's the business product side, that it is like, what is your average revenue per customer? What is your DAUMA? What is your number of paying customers, right? All those metrics that are really related to the business growth. So today, I think as a context, we're going to try to stay on the engineering productivity side, but I think there is a lot of relationships and we might go back and forth and connect a few things related to metrics to the other two dimensions. But yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting topic. So maybe the first question to ask you folks is, what metrics or what productivity metrics do you actually like? Let's kick us off. Vic?
But we're not talking about printing out reams of code and bringing it into the office and like seeing how tall they are, right? We're not doing that one. In terms of productivity, one thing that I really enjoy doing is I do this for every time I onboard a new developer, is I like to see how long it takes them from the moment we hand them the keys to everything, GitHub access to single sign-on, all that stuff. I like to know how long it takes them until they ship their first code. And it can be anything. At Eventbrite, we basically had them edit this one page that was full of like other things other developers have done. There were Beyonce quotes in there. There was just like random music videos. It was inaccessible to the public. But we wanted to see how long it would take you to set up your entire dev environment and be able to push that page live to production. And we wanted to see basically, and it wasn't a measure of you, it was a measure of how good of our processes that we're able to onboard somebody to a point where they get there. And that was very important to us. I'll let someone else go.
I think velocity is a good indicator for measuring team delivery across different teams. There are a lot of caveats with velocity. It is one metric and it's often misused or even abused. But I think within a team, and assuming that the team size stays the same, there aren't a lot of people leaving the team or joining the team. So assuming that the team has reached a stable state, it is a good indicator of whether the team is at least consistently delivering or under compared to where they thought they would be, or if they went over. Again, with some metrics, they can be fudged. Things can go either way, but it is one metric that's quite commonly used. So velocity is often the sum of the story points that each team is taking on. That is usually decided before the work is started at the beginning of the sprint. And then at the end of the sprint, one measures if they achieved that, or if they shot past it, or if they were severely under. There are some gotchas to it. You can't really compare two teams that are working on different products or have different complexity, but it does help to get a consistent measure of work for a given team on a given project. Go ahead, Louis.
No, basically, I think you touched on everything I was going to say related to this topic. I think to quote Charlie Munger, he says, "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome." If you put sugar on the floor, you give it a couple of days, you're going to get ants. And what's really interesting is that right now, I think there are a lot of I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen it a few places. There's a lot of startups, and it plays to this fear that executives have right now, which is, are my engineers productive, or do they have 4 jobs and they're just collecting 4 paychecks at the same time, and they're just gaming the system? But guess what? Things like cycle times, things like velocity, things like story, they're just fantasy stuff. It's just stuff that's made up by people within a team. And it's like comparing apples to oranges. It's never going to work. But they're selling products in this space to measure these things, to measure lines of code. I could write you an application that has 1 million lines of code and does nothing. I could complete as many story points as you like to get the thing, to make it look good and to really inflate the numbers. And I think people do that, right? Like that teams that you should be careful. Teams that are outliers on that, they probably have 4 jobs, because they're focusing way too much on those numbers. But that being said, why do we do it at all then? So there is some use to those numbers, but they are really just, I think you touched on it basically, is just they're only useful to a team itself, right? I want to know, are we going as fast as last week or last sprint? I want to know. And so they're only useful, but what happens is they get abused, right? Because the moment that they're used for anything other than that, now we did this fun thing in our team, right? Where we used to joke about this, that if our salary multiplier was based on number of story points complete, one of my engineers would stand up there, I should be paid $1 million. Look at how many points I'm completing. But those numbers could obviously be gained very easily. I'll pass it to Mitra.
Yeah, I think Louis, you touched on a really good point, that the metrics that we're always looking at, basically we want to quantify our value and the impact that a team is having, but it's so important to look at, what does that metric really say? Again, lines of code or number of commits says nothing as to the impact or the value that the team has had. I actually think, having been at big companies and very small companies, I've come to believe over time that velocity is a bogus metric, means nothing, doesn't really help with anything, honestly. I remember in my last job, you have to calculate velocity, do it every week, and then you share it to the team. And then what's the value that you get from that, right? It's, oh, we did a few less points this week. Okay, there's not really anything that you can say that people don't already know. Maybe someone was sick, maybe like something came up in a project. So it's just, it never gives you the data that you need to make constructive change. And one thing that I did at a previous company with the team is we went like week by week and just focus on our individual goals for the week. What are we going to push out? What are we going to release for this week? And I feel like, yes, that's not a number that you can tie a neat ribbon around and say, here, this is how we quantify our value, but it actually shows the progress that you're making. Tiago, go ahead.
That's a great example, and is related to the metric that I think Louis mentioned, the say-do, right? What is your say-do radio, right? But I actually want to go deep on the velocity thing, why velocity is bad. There is a book that's called When Will It Be Done? And it is an amazing book. It's about forecasting. And the guy actually goes deep on why velocity and usually burn downs, burn ups are bad. And the crazy thing that is the same reason why you don't use average to calculate latency, is because whenever you're using a trend line that kind of is hiding information behind the scenes, you're not actually seeing what's happening. It's like the average velocity per week actually hides so much behind it that you can game it so much in the same way that when you look at, oh, what is the average latency of your system? What is it like? You actually don't get much information because the average will mean something completely different. If you have one request that took like 100 times more than the others, you actually look at the P99 or percentiles. And when it comes to productivity metrics, I think the flow metrics is something that I like a lot more, but it's a lot more complex. It's the combination of what's called the Little's law. That's like cycle time, WIP, and throughput. But I think there is a caveat that Louis said. I think quality needs to be inspected along the way. And that is assuming that you have pull requests, that you're having continuous delivery, all that, to make sure that no one is marking something as done when it was not done, or just gaming the system. It's assuming they're actually delivering value. Then I think it's like cycle time, I think Vic mentioned, is a fantastic metric because it can actually tell more than your velocity, what is your latency, right? What is your latency to push something to production from like conception to customer hands? So I think I like that more, but it's something that's really to get running because there's so many concepts and so many variables that you have to explain to everyone to actually engage. And it's really scary if you really don't get deep into Kanban and all that. Vic?
So what I was going to say was this point that Mitra made about how the measurement of velocity is like an actionable metric, right? Like almost, I think every team I've been in has basically started at a sprint and then realized the pointlessness of Jira points and how it says absolutely nothing, right? Within your team, what does it tell you? One person always picks up the 5-point tickets that are really like a 3-pointer, and then they're doing really big ticket items. It really incentivizes people to pick easier things when you attach points to things, and your incentives are that way. So within your team, it tells you nothing. And then between different teams, once again, it tells you nothing, because what does it mean that this team does 7.5 points on average per week compared to this team, which does 9.5 points? They're arbitrary, right? They're ponies. You can say ponies just as well as points because they're completely meaningless. So every team I've been on has eventually moved to this Kanban system of just, there's work. We plan to achieve X this week, and we're going to do things that help us achieve that. And they've all effectively transitioned toward not measuring anything. It's just really all you're measuring is your ability to deliver on what you're saying and what you're doing. And that's all we care about. And in every one of these teams, that's what we found, that people just stopped having the stress of needing to close points. Like, you don't need to close a ticket by the end of the week. You don't need to break it down into a closable unit just so you can say, this sprint we closed 8 points. You close that ticket when you're done with it, and people were just happier.
That's a great point, Vic. I feel there are a lot of Scrum Masters and Agile coaches out there who are probably cringing and are going to unsubscribe to our podcast going forward. But in the interest of time, I will also share a story where we used to do velocity for teams. And then one of the engineering VPs thought it would be a great metric to share at the company town hall. So they had a big slide with names of each team and their velocity across the engineering org, sorted by descending order. Okay. And then went on a big speech around how good team A was for scoring the most number of points and how horrible the last few teams were because they weren't delivering. Needless to say, there was a big uproar. All the points over the next 3 sprints 10x magically, even though the amount of work was exactly the same. So I completely hear you. Point taken. Velocity doesn't mean anything, not unless it's consistent and across the same team. The other caveat to this is that if word gets out that your velocity is one of the metrics that are being used to measure your performance, you will also see a big change in how user stories are pointed and how many get done. Because now suddenly it's, okay, I need to gamify these numbers because that's the difference between me being a high performer and a regular performer. So those points start climbing very rapidly. Go ahead, Louis.
I guess what I was going to say is that in the 3 buckets that Tiago mentioned earlier, engineering productivity is like the woo-woo science of measurement, right? Like, it's completely fake, right? But almost every team I've been on, they had some dashboard that measured this, right? And it's sad, funny, I don't know, but we measure this my teams have measured it. I know personally as an engineer that it can be gamed and I'm not going to rely on it, but we measure it. It's there. We do the story points. We go through the ceremony, right? And what's really interesting is that as we go up, when you talk about observability, right, it's a lot harder to fake that. You can't really fake that. Maybe you could, but it's a lot harder to fake that. So we're getting into harder science, right? And then when we get into the business metrics, it's impossible to fake that. Like how much you sold, how much GMV you made, how many users you got. And the crazy part is that's the thing that most teams don't even measure, right? That's the thing that a lot of engineering teams don't have a dashboard on. And then that's probably the thing that the smart people will reward you on that mostly, right? It's very interesting. So I don't know if we want to talk a little bit about some things that are more hard science that people should be measuring rather than just, because I see that we mostly agree that basically velocity and stuff is
Pointless.
Yeah. I think the one metric I was gonna mention is The best metrics are often the ones that are super hard to measure, as Mitra was saying. One metric that I remember once we start to quantify and was eye-opening is how much time in days or in hours, depending, like it takes for a particular team to get unstuck after a conflict or after a blocker. It's okay, you got to a business decision or a disagreement on what technology to use and start to track like how many hours did we burn on till we actually agree, disagree, and commit, right? Till we actually, okay, we believe there are 5 different ways to do this, but we're going to pick one and move on. I think that is often a metric that tells a lot about the team dynamic, right? Because usually if you are back and forth and someone is pushing back, the team never makes a decision and never move on. I think that's like the worst sign of productivity that one might have, and it has a lot of impact to morale and many other things. But related to velocity, I think like one of the reasons velocity is hard to compare is because like different teams point things in different ways. The the systems they work are completely different, right? The constraints are completely different. The tenure of the people that work there are completely different too. So it's really hard to compare like the tenure of a team that's been there for 5 years versus a team that has a couple of folks that joined a couple of months ago. So there are many things that are hidden when you only look at velocity. I think in order to have some useful productivity metrics, you almost have to bring so many things to the dashboard, right? What is the like the seniority of the engineers, right? Is it a new product manager or old product managers? Like, what is the skill set gap, right? What are the skills that we might not have on that team? It's like the velocity alone hides a lot underneath.
Yeah, I just wanted to get everyone's opinion on another one that is often measured, but I'm not necessarily sure it's a good metric to measure. It's the number of times the team has been woken up on call after hours. So whatever you call it, pager duty, ops genie. If you are being woken up every night, does that mean that the team is in poor health, or the developers are more likely to burn out because they're having to always stay on top of firefighting and constantly deal with issues? It could be that they are working on a monolith where everybody else is working on new microservices, so they're stuck holding the bill. It could be the team dynamics, like Thiago mentioned. If it's a bunch of junior engineers with nobody having the domain knowledge, that could be an issue, but it's often looked as a poor sign, or people automatically interpret that team is not writing good quality code, they don't have enough testing in place, and the hammer comes down. So I just wanted to see what you folks have done in your experience, or what works well so that it's useful and not gamified. Go ahead, Mitra.
You bring up a really good point. There's some teams who barely get paged at all, and then there's some teams who are paged constantly. I think you can also look at the lower scale of pages. Pages is like Sev2, Sev1, something's really wrong, but then there are also teams that just get tons of bugs all the time, and they're just getting hammered by other teams or even their own product, and all they're doing is fixing things, and they're never able to focus on building something. So I think that points to when we point a ticket, we don't know the quality of the ticket or the root cause of the ticket or the impact of a ticket. So the points, like a 5-point ticket for building a new feature versus a 5-point ticket for like discovery versus a bug fix, should all be weighted differently, in my opinion. I think ways about it, it really comes down to there is no one size fits all. I think Agile Scrum has tried really hard to put this one size fits all around engineering teams, but every single team is so unique and different in the services that they own, the product or feature sets that they own. Are they more back end or front end? Who are their customers? Are they internal or external facing teams? There's so many little nuances that you have to think about before you are able to evaluate how do we measure whether this team is doing good work or not. If a team is like DevOps, let's say, and it's a pretty solid company and their main job is to make sure that everything internally is up and developers are able to build and release, then yeah, maybe like pages and bug fixes is probably like a better thing to be focusing on instead of building new features. But if you're in a brand new product team and you're constantly just like revisiting the work you've done or spending like all your time on discovery, maybe we should be focusing on releasing really quickly. So I feel like you need to maybe take some ideologies from Agile and Scrum, but apply them differently based on your team. Vic, go ahead.
I want to talk about that, but I want to also jump back really quickly to another reason why it's not good to measure things like velocity, or what I have against even pointing tickets, right? Is when you start to assign points to coding, that is not all that an engineering team does. Our lives are everything from meetings to writing documentation to discussing with other teams, like how are we going to solve this common problem we're blocked on, to helping a new team member onboard. And when you assign points to writing code, it incentivizes writing code above everything else. And you end up in the situation where team members become adversaries of each other, where it's who wants to be the person that goes and helps out that junior engineer on board. That's 2 points of my day. I could be closing out a story, or I could be doing this other thing. I don't want to go join this meeting. Why should I do that when that doesn't really contribute toward, it's not a promotable thing for me to go work on this other thing. It effectively makes this, all of this other non-technical unpointed work basically not very useful for you. So that's one thing. And I want to come back now to the thing about some teams, downstream teams are just going to always have more sevs, more outages, more bugs. That's just how it ends up happening. And that's why you often end up finding like downstream teams that get staffed a lot more because they're getting paged more. There's some teams that never get paged.
What do you
Yeah.
mean by downstream teams?
Oh, let's say that you have something like Twitter, right? Where your backend service teams, they're getting a lot more of the traffic and they're getting hammered by so many other systems. They're going to end up getting a lot more of these bug reports and outages, and they're going to get paged more. Their systems are going to hit more limits. Your like team on Twitter is not getting as many outages as like your yesterday. The API team was really suffering. I'm just making something up now. But there are just some teams that just their infrastructure is older, I don't know, whatever it is, right? They just are getting hammered more. So you have to measure, first of all, you do have to measure how many outages they're having. You do have to measure how many sevs we're getting, how many bugs we're getting, all that stuff. And the reason you measure is because otherwise you can't make an impact. But in most good companies, you do have a blameless culture of not measuring these teams and stacking them against, oh, your team had 4 pages last week, we had none. You don't do that. You work toward everyone making yourselves better. So I do believe that you have to track all of these things, but tracking them doesn't make it like that theme is bad or anything. No, Thiago.
Yeah, on that, Vic, I think actually I want to get into another discussion about pull requests. But before I go there, I think the idea that there is this group of metrics that came up in the last couple of years called the Dora metrics, but there is a book called, it starts with A, forgot the name of the book, but there is a metric that's called mean time to recover. Like when it comes to incidents, it's like what is able to distinguish a high-performing engineering team from a low-performing is not if they have a lot of crashes or not. I think that's true, but how quickly they can recover from incident. But I think that you brought up, Vic, is about measuring interruptions, right? Like how many times per day is the team working on like non-planned stuff, right? And things that were not planned for the week, on things that just came up, right? On calls and postmortems and being stuck on bridges to address outages, all that. I think that's really disruptive. And the discussion that I want to start is about pull requests. And I think an anti-pattern that I have seen on pull requests, and I think is like a really good predictor in my experience, is like how many pull requests do you usually have and how big or small they are, right? If I see that like you have someone working on a single ticket, on a single feature for days and not a single pull request has been open, that's a recipe for disaster in my experience. And like the principle that I try to follow is the high throughput, low latency, right? Like pull requests should be small and should come often, ideally every day. And whenever you're not seeing a particular engineer not opening any pull requests for a whole week, right? And update after update on stand-up is, yeah, I'm still working on that. You might for sure predict that's gonna result in somehow and some like massive pull requests being broken down and days of work being wasted. So I think that's one example of, it's hard to measure, but it's like how often are engineers opening and actually deploying those chains is a really good predictor of like how on time we're going to be able to deliver this thing. Lee?
I mean, on the pull request bit, I definitely agree with you there, Tiago. I don't think that's woo science or anything like that. I do think there's some good principles there. There's some good rules of thumb. If you're pushing out, we had this at Jet, right, where we would go into code freeze right before Black Friday, Cyber Monday week. And that doesn't mean we stopped working. Obviously we were monitoring our system during the shopping 4 or 5x increase in traffic, but we still had tickets and we had changes we wanted to make to our system and upgrades and what have you. And things would pile on. And definitely we had one year where there was so many drastic changes. We had to roll them out in phases, basically. As the pull requests were put into a separate branch, we had to merge them in phases and test. Okay, this was this sprint. Now we're deploying that. This was this sprint. And so anyway, there was a bunch of things we had to do around that to make sure that the pull request is insane. So you definitely don't want to be in a place where you're deploying tons and tons of untested code or whatever. But I do want to go back to one thing, right? And the thing I want to go back to is this idea of SLAs and pages. I do think service level agreements are also not, that's the promise you make to your customer, right? That's pretty hard science, right? If we have an outage and we have this customer cannot access this thing, generally speaking, of course, there's degraded experiences and things like that. But generally speaking, that should be counted as a sort of outage and you could measure that. And I do think you can classify teams, right? If a team is working on, let's say, analytics and their customers are internal users that want to just pull numbers, what's a reasonable time frame for them not to violate that? And a reasonable time frame might be 24 hours that they could fix their bugs. And within 24 hours, we promise the system will be that's obviously pretty bad, 24 hours. For some internal teams, that might be perfectly fine. But I think once you get into customer-facing, customers that pay money or are transacting with you in some way, I think in the case of Twitter, the API team, for example, I know that they just put, as a Twitter API consumer, I know that they just put a price tag on that API. And so now, right, when they're having an outage, my app is down, I'm not making money on this thing, and it's because of them. And so they have to have some kind of SLA with me, some kind of guarantee, or at least give them my money back, right? And so the point is that I do think SLAs are very much hard science, and you can measure how many times a team is breaking promises. And, especially to their customers, you can measure that. And then you can, of course, I think Vic touched on something real important, blameless culture. It's not about blaming anybody. It's just about improving that and getting to a better place. I do think that SLAs are basically important, and it is important to classify teams between tiers. For example, let's say that somebody who has direct API consumers is probably a tier 1, and they have a very different SLA structure that's standard across other teams that also have customer-facing things. And then we can measure them against each other, absolutely. But so in a tier 2 might be they can fix it within 3 hours. No one's going to get too mad because there's already a lag in the data. These are very different sort of things, but these are hard numbers. I don't want to make this sound like this is like the velocity stuff. Not like that at all. Kira, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think SLAs are definitely hard and concrete, and they can vary based on what's agreed upon by the team and by your customers, depending on if you're a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Just touching back on the number of PRs or looking out for PRs as a metric. Again, if word gets out within the engineers that PRs are being monitored by my manager, you will suddenly see a lot smaller, pointless PRs with space changes or adding documentation or changing the place where the braces are. Again, I'm not saying everyone is disingenuous around how they go about these, but there are other telltale signs as well. So one other way to look at a PR is what is your not biggest PR that you raise, but the most complex PR that you raise in terms of, or set of PRs that you raised in terms of solving a complex problem that, let's say, only you were able to do, but nobody else could. So that also helps. And maybe something else to consider is number of comments that you leave on other people's PRs. So now you're not only working on your feature, but you're enabling others to improve their code before it makes it to QA or before it makes it to production, right? It's
Well, what
cheapest
about,
to.
what about nitpicking, right? What about nitpicking? Because if you're going to encourage comments, and there's a lot of engineers that do that, and then they end up frustrated with each other. I've had to be in the middle of that. Look at these comments I'm getting. This is, what the hell is this? Sorry, go.
Some of that is necessary. Like when we start measuring these, we disincentivize like healthy conversation like that. Right? Everyone is just going to be like, I did my job. I'm just going to step back and look at this other person burn. Like their code is going to go to production. They're going to get a defect. I don't want to get involved in that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because often engineers are deeply opinionated and highly passionate. So as soon as you have them leaving comments left and center in PRs, flame wars are bound to start. So there is no avoiding that. And people do get pedantic over it and get really mad over nitpicking and every comment left. So again, this is another one that can be gamed and can cause lots of frustration. Sorry, go ahead, Tiago.
Yeah, I think related to pull requests, one thing that I disagree with what you said, Kator, is about engineering managers looking at pull requests. I think the engineers must know that the engineering manager is looking at pull requests and is calling them out whenever something is out of track. I think it's actually healthy to have engineers knowing that the engineering manager is not every day, not every single pull request, but like once a week, maybe looking at the work and seeing, okay, I see the kind of quality that this person's producing, and it can actually give some specific feedbacks on PRs. But I think the thing about PR comments and nitpicking is, I think it's actually an interesting measure of seniority, right? I think it's like how one is able to handle really aggressive comments and deal with that and get unblocked, and how one actually add comments that are actually accepted and the suggestions they give are actually implemented. I think is like there are often a lot of senior engineers that are not able to handle whenever someone actually hurts their ego. And I think that's like on the behavior side is probably one area that I had to intervene a lot as an engineering manager. Is, oh, the principal engineer is blocking this PR. The senior engineer spent 2 weeks doing this massive refactor, and now the engineer manager has to solve. The principal engineer is not going to let the PR goes in, and you have to find a way. So I have been in hundreds of these conversations. And I think while there are senior engineers that they're able to break down the PRs, they're able to do one-on-ones with the principal engineer ahead of time, they almost never get this kind of surprise. So it is a really interesting metric. And I think the other metric that I think is on pull requests super interesting to measure, and excluding nitpicking, is like how many comments you left actually resulted in tasks that were implemented by your colleagues, because I think that is about improving the quality of the code base, right? But I think is something that can be gained. But I think that the pull requests knowledge management and how people collaborate is actually a super good way to debug how the team is doing.
None of this is measurable though. Like you can't really measure any of this. And it's one of these things. It's very much like the moment you start measuring it, people get very performative about it. People are suddenly leaving useless comments. You know what? 80% of the PRs that I look at in my day are all like, they are very much and looks good to me, thumbs up PRs. And they deserve to be. They don't need anything more than that. And you know what? And that's a good comment. If it looks good to you, this is not, you're not introducing a bug. It's good work. That's it. Push it up. Don't block it. And I have seen teams where someone feels like, oh, I got to do something that like makes it seem like I'm worth what I'm being paid for. And they hold up these PRs with just like ridiculous things, like they want to talk about the philosophy of file systems and why this should be this and that. And I've seen people go into this thing like, and I just look at this and I go, I'm glad you're not on my team, because this is who is this performance for? And you know what? And that's when you can tell their manager's measuring this. Their managers measuring whether this person is able to start a useful discussion from PRs. And so you start to wonder, okay, we're not going to measure PR comments. Okay, then how do you really measure the impact that this person is making? And I find time and again that really it often comes down to some sort of subjective measure of you just asking your team, like, how has your relationship with this person been? Have they been helpful to you? And you simply observe what kind of issues are they bringing up in team conversations on Slack or whatever? Are they raising issues that other people aren't seeing? Are they responding well to picking up issues? Are they just improving everyone's lives around you? It is all super subjective, but that weirdly enough is the best way that I found to measure people and how they're doing. Yeah, Mithra.
I think you're completely right. And I go back to in the beginning, I said something around throw out all the numbers. It doesn't matter. It doesn't tell us shit, honestly. And then you find managers, unfortunately, spending so much time every week and every month, like pulling these numbers together to present to some higher up. And for what? I think we're all like keep circling the drain on this, saying like none of this matters, because when you look at what we want to be measuring and want to be seeing, it's the impact and the things that the teams are building. This isn't a qualitative way to or a quantitative way to measure this, but weekly goals I've found to be the most successful if you still want to have some sort of urgency around delivering and picking up tickets and doing work, but not have it be so focused on a number. And it's going to be different for everyone. And I think that's the whole point, right? For one engineer, maybe they should be spending all week writing a design doc, and another engineer who's on call should be spending all week on bugs. And so we just need to be able to build some sort of measurable instance, in my case, the weekly goal planning with the whole team, so that everyone is aware of everyone's priorities and they're able to see that, okay, people are actually doing things that are improving my life, my team's life, and the company.
Yeah, I agree with both of you basically. And I don't want to derail things, but I want to tell a funny story. Picture this, right? There is let's say, Sev A emergency bug that has brought things down. I am a manager of a team, maybe I don't know, a year in, and we're trying to figure out what the hell's going wrong. I'm looking at this with one of my most senior people. We're looking at this thing. And so we pull up the code, right? And there it is. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, who wrote this effing code, right? And we're looking at it. And then we pulled the Git, right? It turns out I wrote it. And then I look at this and I'm like, but you approved it. And so anyway, I just wanted to, it's totally unrelated, but I've got a lot of fun stories like this around PRs, people arguing over PRs. This wasn't an argument. This was just a way to lighten something that was actually pretty serious. When you're writing a lot of code and you're doing it quickly, sometimes things slip through, even through the pull request, right? And anyway, I'm with you both. I think this could be, but overarching, I agree with Thiago that you can have rules of thumb here that a very large PR with a ton of code in it is probably not good. And you got to be very careful with that, because you can't actually, it's a rule of thumb. It's not it's got to be 20 lines of code, or it's got to be 3 files, or it's not that simple. And so it's just a rule of thumb. And what does that mean? It's very ambiguous. And so it's very difficult in an ambiguous environment. Generally speaking, it probably should be something that you and another person can understand in a few minutes sitting down, right? Ideally, you don't have to spend 2 hours looking at this code and trying to figure out what the hell is it doing. That's probably not a good pull request. But anyway, so I think there's rules of thumb, but they can absolutely be gamed. And if you say, I'm expecting you to leave, the more comments you leave, the better. I think it's just going to increase this tension, which does happen, right? Because people have different styles. I've had developers argue about point-free functional development versus not, and just yell at each other, right? So anyway, Thiago, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I fully in agreement with all you guys are saying. And I think that's why I feel it's important to be inspecting the work and the pull requests, because I fully agree with what Vic, a lot of times it comes down to how helpful are they being, how they're impacting, right? But the problem as a manager is that if you actually only rely on 360 one-on-one feedback, you're doing that once every 2 months at the most. And I think by spending some time looking at the PR, seeing the kind of comments they're leaving, you actually are able to short circuit that and give more feedback sooner, and also to have more, you actually can go more deep on whenever you're giving feedback or whenever you're writing the performance assessment, or rather than just relying on what the peers are saying. I think like there is an element that the manager has to have, like, needs to have a really like unbiased perspective. But I think the other side of things is definitely feel like engagement on pull requests. And I'm not talking about nitpick PRs. I'm talking about like, when was the last time you left a comment that actually resulted in someone improving something? I think it is actually really important thing. And another thing, depending on how many required approvers you have on the pull request system, the fact that people are not looking at the PRs and reviewing proactively might lead to a lot of delays. So like I work on a team, we had 3 required approvers for every single merge, and it was like a pain to actually get to approve and not have people like with their PRs waiting for 24, 48 hours for approvers. And a lot of times we get into comments that are really derailing the discussion and blocking the PRs and not really helping that work to get better. But I think overall, I feel there are some guardrails, though. I think for low performers, especially when in regards to pull requests, that I think are really hard to gain, especially if you're looking at the quality of the work and what is that person doing. I think there is some usefulness into have some kind of metrics, especially for low performers.
So we've done this thing before that you're talking about, right? Where like you have to have X number of approvers. And I found that when we enforced 2 minimum reviewers, it almost always ended up that whoever did the first review would leave the most constructive feedback. And the second person was there simply because they had a job, which was to rubber stamp this. And I found that simply we require 1 reviewer for everything. You just have to. But every one of us is an admin. If this is urgent, you need to get this out. You don't need to call anybody. We trust you, you're adults, make it happen. But what I found so just last week, this happened to me where I pushed out some code. It was beautiful code. It worked fantastically well. Pushed it out. And then I didn't merge it in main. I created a pull request. And I thought to myself, this is, yeah, it looks great to me, but I really want to ping this other engineer who hasn't had time to review it. And I wanted him to take a look at it with me. I said, let's just look at this. We're really straying from what this podcast is about, but we got on just a video call and I walked him through the code. And it turned out that this code had like a really fundamental flaw. And that was exposed by us just walking through it. The thing is, I think that evaluating like how people comment on this and the contributions they make on GitHub, unfortunately, I find that it takes away from the kind of richer communication you can have over like a video call or like a walkthrough. And so we find more and more that a lot of this very useful communication happens offline from GitHub, and it ends up not really getting reflected. Like you may have a 2-hour call over a PR, but the PR just says, as discussed, thumbs up. But really, like some really rich conversation has happened around it. And what I do think that we as engineers need to do is you need to recognize your colleague to your manager. You put it in their file if you have that, put it in your kudos system if you have that, because so much of engineering leadership is subjective when it comes to it. And we don't really have objective data points around how someone is doing. And we rely so much on our peers to tell our managers how we are doing, how we helped, what kind of value we really added. And the managers are not in every one of these conversations to know exactly how this person has really stretched this team, what they've done for us. And so this becomes everyone's job to drop that note to your manager to say, this person really helped me out, or this person really helped me out, but I think another way they could really grow is XYZ. Tell that to your manager or tell that to that person directly, depending on what kind of culture you have. Have you complimented someone's work? And I also talked about how some PRs are just looks good to me PRs, but you can also comment on something they've done and say, hey, I really learned something here. Great job with this. People like hearing that. It's going to make someone's day. And these are all non-objective ways to measure performance, to elevate your team, all that stuff. Peter.
Yeah, that's a great point, Vic. I do think that's harder to do in a remote world than it used to be when everyone was in the office in person, especially for folks that are new to the team. So, like a co op student joining or a new engineer on the team, it's easy to tap on someone's shoulder and have that discussion and have the senior engineer show them or walk them through the code or just point to the place in their monitor where they are stuck, as opposed to having a full blown call. If you have that comfort with your team and if you're okay jumping on a call, then it makes it easier. But I do feel that, especially for new hires on the team that are still a little shy, don't know where their place is, don't know their way around the source code yet, there is hesitation to have that sort of collaboration. Maybe one other metric to touch on is the focus metrics. They're sometimes harder to measure, but like some of the ones that came up in our discussion prior were how many hours does each engineer get to do deep work? Or how many meetings is either each engineer pulled in during the course of the day? How many engineers did you drag to every meeting to get one decision? So this also speaks to the team culture and back to the no blame culture or how often teams work well together. So it does go back to that. So having a chance to do deep work greatly reduces burnout and gives them a chance to work on the stuff that they're working on. Go ahead, Thiago, maybe one last point and then we can do a quick rapid fire.
Yeah, I have 100 other points. No, but I think there are a few things. I 100% agree with Vic on the number of compliments that you have received or given on a particular week is a really good measure of like how helpful you have been to the team, right? But I think it takes a lot to break the habit and get people to actually to voice that over. Two ideas maybe I leave here that I have used in the past that were super helpful is to create one is to create an appreciation channel. And you as an engineering manager start to post there whenever you see that someone went above and beyond, you just send like a one line. Thanks, Vic, for staying late and helping so and so with this crash, whatever. And over time, people are gonna start to praise each other on things that you never see. And the other side of the coin, I feel that a lot of like staff plus engineers, they have a really hard time actually giving compliments. And whenever they give is actually makes not the day, makes the week of the person, right? So one thing that I have been telling all my staff engineers is let's appreciate more, let's like compliment more, even if you feel small, it's a small thing, but because whenever they do that, right, it is actually super, super beneficial for the culture. The other thing is we started doing is like at the end of the demos on the week, we have like a time at the end for shout outs, like for people to thank other people. And I think that is also super helpful. And you can actually see who is actually like doing a lot of things, helping a lot of people, and the people that are not that engaged. And I end with this comment is I feel that if you look holistically across the board, right? Slack threads, Jira tickets, PRs, right? I think like number of times you said something on a meeting, you can actually just by the number of engagement, right, across the board, you can actually have some interesting data on like how much someone is contributing versus how. I think there's often days that you're going to not be engaged a lot because you're focused on deep work. But on average, like on a week, on a month, that number has to stay up. And I feel that is something that you often don't see on low performers, right? On low performers, what is actually not there is the engagement. And I think in those cases, setting targets of 1 PR per day, like whatever it is, besides the goals of the week, as Mitra was saying, might be super helpful to debug where they're getting stuck, like what's happening. But I know it's controversial, but I found that setting those kind of like metrics for low performers sometimes is able to get them out of the comfort zone and know at least where to start.
Wow, that was more than one good metric, Thiago. But maybe let's do a quick rapid fire round. We can do a round table. This is going to be hard because I think most of the metrics we brought up during our show today have all been refuted or at least been marked as controversial in some way or form. So what's one good metric you should use to measure productivity for your team?
One, number of PRs merged and deployed per day.
Okay, thank you, Thiago. Louis.
For me, it's going to have to be something we didn't even touch on too much today. I think it's going to have to be business metrics, basically. For example, at Jet, we had this dashboard that was live, and we would see the sales numbers in real time, the number of carts that were checked out in the last few minutes. And we had a little trend line that was also live versus last week versus this time yesterday. And what's really interesting is that a lot of times we had issues with our system, and the only way we could, right, because this is rare, but it happened a few times. And the only way we could tell, because there's a huge slowdown in the number of carts being checked out. And so what's going on? And what's really interesting about that is, even if that turns out to be a dud, let's say you as an engineer see the number of carts dropping this hour and you're like, what the hell's going on? And you do your research and everything looks perfect. Everything's running. The logs are there. I'm checking the site. I'm running whatever tests you got. Everything looks perfect. And you find out, you go and you talk to the business and you find out, well, actually today is just a slow day. It's a holiday. And so people aren't great. You know what? That was still a useful exercise for you as an engineer to understand this damn business and to talk to those business people. And so to me, I feel like those are metrics that you cannot hide from. And especially if you have visibility in real time. Now, a lot of organizations, for reasons which are beyond me, you trust these people to have access to PI in the database, but you don't trust them to look at the business numbers in real time. It's a huge mistake, in my opinion. But I think those are the sorts of things. And then secondarily, I would lean on the SLAs, and I would lean on those. If you're breaking promises to customers, again, it's whoever your customers are, they could be other engineers. I think you're probably not doing a good job if you're breaking promises all the time. Something's wrong there. And at the end of the day, we could say we got legacy. I know we touched on that a little bit, but if we got legacy, that's your problem now, right? Why do we have legacy? Get rid of it. That is still the buck stops with you as the developer, as the owner of that system, and you got to figure it out, right? Whatever that means for you to fix those SLAs at the end of the day, you're responsible. And I feel the business numbers, impossible to fake. You're faking the number of carts, you're going to jail. You're faking financial stuff. So, they're not going to be faking that, right? And then the SLAs, they could be fudged a little, but still very hard. Now, once we get into the woo-woo metrics, everything can be fudged in my experience, and I've seen them fudged. And in my opinion, they're useful, but only in so much as you're willing to really sift through them and understand what the hell is going on. The pull request is massive and all of that, or you got a low performer. Now we got to study all their pull requests. Let's pull them up. Let's see what they've been doing. Anyway, I will pass it to Mitra.
I actually was going to say something similar other than my weekly goal thing, because I know that's not a metric, but I would say measure yourself against your team's goals. Most, if not every single engineering team should have some set of OKRs or goals that are derived from your top level business goals. And if you're doing work that does not directly impact any of those, that should immediately tell you that you're spending your time on the wrong thing. Some people might say, oh, if you're on call or if you're battling a ton of bugs, then that should be a team goal, that we reduce our operational costs or the time spent on non-feature work by X%. So that's my answer.
Go ahead, Vic.
My answer was going to be actually exactly what Mithra said, because that is most what I care about. Is I want to know whether our team because those ultimately are the contract we have with our partner teams and with leadership, is what are we agreeing to deliver on? And you could have 3 PRs today, you could have 5 PRs tomorrow. What I really care about is not the number of PRs, but whether we're making progress towards our OKRs. And exactly like you said, right? If you are battling fires because you have a legacy system, that should have been one of your biggest objectives, is to figure out how to get off that system. And that is actually one of my team's objectives, is getting off of one of our legacy systems. And so that is one of our most important things we need to do, move off of that thing to a new thing. And so we measure it, because when you don't measure it, you really don't care about it. We do, of course, measure our service level objectives and our service level indicators, SLIs, to make sure that we're able to meet our SLAs that we have with customers, all the latency numbers and fun stuff like that. But those generally on normal days are not going to suffer. But the thing I care about most is simply that we're making progress.
Just to add some spiciness into this, because I actually agree, OKRs and what you're tracking is the most important thing. But I think there's an element where whenever you're blindly working on only what is being measured, and you're not working on the citizenship, or because there are a lot of things happening on the day-to-day that are not impacting the company OKR, right? And I feel like this is an anti-pattern that I see sometimes. Like the engineer is so focused on that particular thing. I'm moving this, and like they're asshole to everybody else, and everything else is a disruption to them. And I think there is a caveat to that. Is yes, OKRs are the most important thing, but there are a lot of times things that we don't often set OKRs for. There are guardrails, availability. Like there are many things that you have to keep working, that sometimes you have to be there. But I think that's one thing that bothers me a little bit whenever someone says he's the OKR. He's not only that. They're like the subtle art of knowing when to not work on the OKR for a while.
Thank you, Thiago. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that wasn't covered already. I was just going to say, when Vic was sharing, what gets measured gets managed. That's the quote from Peter Drucker. But I think we also need to use some common sense around what we are measuring in this case, because like we discussed, everything can be gamified. So on this happy note, I think we will wrap this episode up. We will probably do a separate episode entirely on product metrics because there's a lot to unravel there. But for today, that's all. Thank you, everyone.